Hello, I am here today with Rebecca Lewis, who is faculty in the College of Public Planning, Policy, and Management, or 3PM. Her teaching and research interests include land use policy, growth management, urban form, housing affordability in rural Oregon, transportation planning and finance, and also with Nico Larco, who is faculty in the Department of Architecture and the director of Urbanism Next, a research and convening group that Rebecca is also a part of. They are the joint recipients of the UO Sustainability Award for Innovation, an award sponsored by the Office of the Vice President of Research and Innovation. This award recognizes a University of Oregon project whose innovations were developed in the course of UO research and are now offered as publicly available products or services that improve sustainability. They were selected for this award due to their leading work on new mobility, autonomous vehicles, and e-commerce, and the impacts they have on patterns of land use, land consumption, sprawl, greenhouse gas emissions, and accessibility. So welcome, Rebecca and Nico.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
Yeah. So to start, just talk to me about Urbanism Next, what it does and what the background is on it.
Maybe I'll take that one, Rebecca.
Sounds good.
So Urbanism Next is a center that was established, about 4 years ago now. And the basic question that we ask is, what are the impacts of emerging technologies on cities? So we look at things like new mobility, everything that includes Uber and Lyft and e-scooters and bike share and all these different types of things, autonomous vehicles, so self-driving cars, and e-commerce. And while we look at those things, our primary goal is not the technologies themselves, but understanding how they're going to impact the things that we both love and do a ton of research around, which is cities and communities. So we are interested in how those types of innovations are going to be impacting things like land use, urban design, building design, transportation, real estate, and then fundamentally, related to the award, we're really interested in how all those things together are going to have effects on things like equity, health, the environment, and the economy.
Great. Yeah, and so for Rebecca, tell me about your research in particular, its focus and what it does to move the field and our understanding forward.
So my research predominantly focuses on land use and growth management. So how cities and states put policies in place to regulate land. And as that relates to new mobility in cities, as Nico was mentioning, one of the main focuses is not on technology itself in terms of autonomous vehicles and new mobility, but what that means for urban form. And so the NSF grant was instrumental in helping us map out a framework of what those impacts might be. One of the key pillars of that area focuses on land use and how we build our cities. So how we're using land for auto-oriented uses, how we're using land for housing, how dense that housing is, how much land we're putting in parking, the size of our metropolitan footprint, and other sorts of things.
Great. Yeah, and Nico, same question for you. What does your research focus on specifically, and how does that factor into this award?
Right now, my research is a whole lot around a lot of the topics of Urbanism Next, as a lot of my time's really spent organizing the center itself. But specifically in the past, I've done, and a lot of the work that I'm bringing to this is looking at the impacts on urban design. So how are these innovations going to be impacting things like street design, how we define place, how things such as the entire metropolitan footprint might shift because of these. So is there going to be more or less sprawl, those kinds of things. And an important one in the world of urban design, but often overlooked by people generally, is what impacts all of these innovations are going to have on parking. And there's huge opportunities for improvement to our built environments as we potentially need a lot less parking.
Yeah, and I'm just purely curious, so it's okay if you don't have an answer yet, but are either of your brains tickling with wondering how a pandemic, new age of pandemics is going to affect parking and urban design and things like that?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, it's kind of interesting. So as we're doing this interview this morning, we are just now putting out on our website, urbanismnext.org, an entire section on COVID impacts, on the impacts the whole crisis is going to be having on the virus is going to be having on cities. So we're looking not only, and I would say not primarily on what's the change that's happening right now, but we're really interested in what's going to be happening what we call early post-crisis, so the reopening phase, and late post-crisis, the recovery or new normal phase. And really looking at those same topics that we've been looking at, in Urbanism Next really has been looking at disruptions. This being a new disruption, what are the impacts going to be on land use, urban design, building design, transportation, real estate, and again, what are the impacts going to be on equity, health, the environment, and the economy?
And I've shifted some current research projects to shift focus on some of these things. We received a Resilience Initiative grant to work with the city on transportation behavior, and we're trying to think about how transportation behavior has changed with COVID. So instead of working on thinking about encouraging people to use biking, walking, and transit to get to downtown Eugene, we're thinking about how their transportation patterns have shifted so that we can better understand some of these issues. The other one I'll mention that I think is really important that relates to work I've done with Urbanism Next that's hugely important as we move forward is on the financing and funding piece. A couple of years ago, I did some work with Urbanism Next on thinking about how autonomous vehicles would impact our budget sources. Now we're in this whole new world of thinking about how transportation budgets are being impacted. We're seeing gas taxes fall tremendously, but we're also seeing that on things that relate to housing as well. And so the long-term impacts on municipal budgeting, state budgets are going to be huge in terms of how we pay for some of these programs that are so important.
Yeah, that's, I just think how exciting it must be to be in your field where since you're focused on disruption anyway, it's sort of like, oh, hey, look, disruption. I can think about that. But also I love that point that there's sort of a, maybe a perception that academic research is removed from the real world, and your work really showcases how it can both be fast and be responding quickly, and also like really applicable and really focused on how we actually respond to things and how we actually deal with things.
Yeah, I'd just add, I would say like a huge focus of the work that we've been doing at Urbanism Next has really been on doing research that's really responding to needs that we're seeing in the communities. I think this is pretty inherent in anyone who does research related to sustainability, is that you can't just do theoretical kind of navel gazing type research. You really want to make, because of the impacts are so large and happening so quickly, and that we really need to be shifting what we do. Even those of us who do more theoretical work are really looking at how to translate that into applied work. And so we do a lot of work with cities directly, with the private sector directly, to try to implement these changes that we're seeing and put them in action.
Yeah, fantastic. So my next question is for both of you. So maybe start with Rebecca. How do you bring your research and/or your consulting work into your classrooms?
It's a great question. So that study I was just mentioning on autonomous vehicles and budgets actually was a combination of the Sustainable City Year program with Urbanism Next and a class that I was teaching on public budgeting. So I do a lot of applied work in the classroom, and it's been really useful for students to try to think about these future issues. I did a project in my growth management class as well last year, where students were looking at comprehensive plans to think about whether they were prepared for e-commerce and new mobility, working with the cities of Eugene and Gresham. And I think it's hugely important for students to be thinking about these things. And I think we've all sort of started to take COVID as a way to think about shifting the way we think about topics in the classroom, because students are going to be emerging into this totally different field. And so we can't teach them things that were written in a textbook in 1975. We have to adapt and respond to these new issues. And so it's been really interesting and useful. It's also been great to get new ideas from students. I know Nico's done a lot of seminars with architecture students that have led to some of this work, but students have really creative ideas. And so in that project that focused on autonomous vehicles and budgets, students were coming up with creative ways to think about paying for transportation in an autonomous future. And so it's great sort of for doing the research, for engaging students, for helping students think about what their career will look like within these fields.
Yeah, fantastic. How about you, Nico?
Yeah, absolutely. Working with students on these topics is both tremendously exciting and tremendously productive. So I can say, the Urbanism Next framework, which more or less organizes all the work that we've been doing, helped helped us get a National Science Foundation grant, and then actually helped us, we developed it further through that grant, and now is the basis of the Nexus, this online site that we have that talks about these topics. That framework was really developed largely with students early on. So as Rebecca was mentioning, we've done a ton of group independent studies, we call them. So, we'll have like 6 or 7 students in a term working on these topics diligently all together. And that has been the foundation of a lot of this work. Last term, for the first time in the last 3 or 4 years, I actually taught a course specifically on these topics. So a seminar on these topics, and students are just really thirsty to be learning about these things, creating new knowledge. This is such a new field that it's not that difficult to be, kind of at the cutting edge of creating new knowledge, because all of it's new. And so a great opportunity for people to learn how to do research, how to create new ideas, and translate those into ways that people outside of the university can really understand and use the information. So it's been bringing students into this has been just great, absolutely great.
Yeah, fantastic. So my last question is also for both of you, and it's why do you think it's important to engage with sustainability topics at the University of Oregon as a research institution, as a teaching institution? And when I say sustainability, I'm talking about sort of that 3-legged stool idea that includes environment, equity, and economy. So feel free to talk about whichever pieces resonate most with you and with your work.
Why don't you start, Rebecca?
Sure. So I think our disciplines are inherently future-oriented, particularly planning. We're thinking about this sort of long period of time. And so sustainability has this sort of same aspect of thinking about the future. And as we thought about this framework that Nico's mentioned, those 3 legs of the stool came in as we thought about impacts. So we are, as sort of, we both came out of the Sustainable Cities Institute, have been thinking about sustainability topics in the classroom, have taught around sustainability in the past, and we applied that same lens to think about the impacts of new mobility and autonomous vehicles on cities. Our minds went to the same thing in terms of thinking about equity, the environment, and the economy. We also added in governance as a way to sort of think about how we organize and respond to these issues. But those 3 things end up being the same legs of the stool as we think about impacts. And we run into the same challenges of sort of economy driving things, trying to think about how we preserve the environment, and equity being a key consideration, but often being a huge challenge in terms of implementing these technologies.
Yeah, I'll just add that, in terms of all this work happening at University of Oregon, I've often said for years now, as Rebecca mentioned, we're deeply involved with the Sustainable Cities Institute, which I'm one of the directors for. U of O is a fantastic place to be doing work on sustainability. I'd say there's 2 main reasons for that. One of them is there's just such a depth of knowledge here in so many different disciplines. In other places, you have a person who does sustainability, or maybe a couple of people in one field or another. And the wonderful thing about U of O is that we have people who work on sustainability across the board. More or less in every topic you can find, there's someone who's doing sustainability work on that topic. And so the level of conversation is really, really high, and the ability to quickly engage and not have to explain, where you're coming from or why these issues are important or the history of these issues just makes it really kind of a fast-paced, quick-moving research. The other thing that's really great about U of O is that, for better or for worse, it's a very flat organization, and so it's been possible to work across disciplines fairly easily and quickly, which I think that's one of the great strengths that UO has, is not only that we have a lot of people who are really good in their particular disciplines, but we have a lot of people who are good in their disciplines and talk to people in disciplines around them. And that has just been, I think, it has led to really good thinking, really great discoveries, really good kind of information that can be applied, and also just a fun place to be doing this research.
Fantastic. Well, thank you to both of you for your time and for your work, and congratulations on your award.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.